Now, even though this video should cover all of the basics, I will say if you have any questions after, or if you're just interested in maybe playing some Riftbound, you can come join us on the Riftbound community Discord server that I set up. You can even download our tabletop simulator mod if you want to try out the game for yourself and some friends. If you don't have any of those, there are plenty of people in the Riftbound Discord that would be happy to play some games with you and show you the basics. People are always happy to answer questions and play games with both veterans and inexperienced players. So if that's what you're into, feel free to come join us. Otherwise, enjoy the video. Since Riftbound, the League of Legends trading card game, finally got its official name, I've seen a lot of questions about the game, how it all works, and I've seen a lot of misinterpretations out there from people who haven't been paying super close attention. So I wanted a one-stop shop video where you can learn everything you need to about the game, not necessarily from like a how-to-play perspective, but more about reading the cards and understanding what's going on. And if you want a more in-depth explanation of specific rules, there's other videos on this channel for you. This is just kind of like a good starting point of what the games are all about. So for starters, the thing you'll notice about Riftbound that's dramatically different to traditional trading card games is you're not dealing damage to an opponent. Your primary objective is to capture 8 points. There are 2 methods of capturing a point. Well, 3. One is to conquer a battlefield. Battlefields are types of cards. You move your cards from your base to battlefields. And when you move a card to a battlefield, if that battlefield was empty and you're uncontested, no one plays a card effect to get you off of that, you conquer that battlefield. If your card remains on that battlefield for an entire turn cycle, meaning at the start of your turn, if you control a battlefield, you will hold that battlefield, which is another way of acquiring a point. So if I was to move a unit onto an empty battlefield, I would acquire a point for moving onto that battlefield uncontested, and then if my unit survives all the way back to the start of my next turn, I would get an additional point. The third way of acquiring points I won't talk about too much, but there's going to be, and we already know of, one card effect that can cheat a point into play without having to conquer a battlefield or hold a battlefield specifically. Now let's go all the way back to basics and talk about how we play cards. First of all, this is a rune. Specifically, we're looking at a mental rune. There are 6 different colors in the game: blue, red, orange, purple, green, and yellow. For now, we're looking at the blue rune or the mental rune. There are 2 things you can do with a rune. You can think of these as lands from, say, something like Magic the Gathering or mana from Hearthstone. This is how you're going to be paying for cards. There's a few big differences between, say, a rune and a land for Magic the Gathering. The first of those differences, and probably the biggest of those differences, is that your runes are in an entirely separate deck from your main deck of cards. Your main deck of cards is 40 cards, and you have a 12-card deck that is your rune deck. You draw 2 cards from your rune deck each turn, meaning that you're getting access to 2 more energy per turn. I'm going to first cover the main thing that runes do, because this is what you're going to be most familiar with most card games. So let's pause and park runes for a second and move on to Watchful Sentry, our first unit card we're looking at. At the top left, you can see the cost of the unit. At the top right, you can see the might of the unit. In the bottom, you can see the name of the card. Above the name of the card, you can see a tag. Think of this as a tribe or a race or whatever you need to think of it from whatever game you're used to. There aren't any effects, at least going off of memory, that reference these tags yet, but I assume at some point there'll be a card in the future that's like, you know, your Freljord cards have +1 might or something like that. We've got a keyword, Death Knell, and then the text of the card is draw 1. Whenever there's a keyword, there'll always be some amount of text in parentheses letting you know, hey, this is what that keyword means. So in this case, Death Knell, draw 1, and then in brackets, it's clarifying, hey, when I die, you get this effect. One thing to quickly mention is that this is the old card design frames, so the official product that we'll be getting in the future is going to look dramatically different. An example of the big upgrade, in case you haven't seen it, here's 2 Dreadbloom Predators. On the left is the before version of the card frames, and on the right is the current version of the card frames. Obviously, there's a massive upgrade there. Let's quickly go back to talking about Watchful Sentry, though. We're going to move on to Dreadbloom Predator just in a second. What I would have to do to play out a Watchful Sentry is tap 2 runes and then play the Watchful Sentry into my base. You don't have to play a card into your base. You can play a card into anything that you control. So you always control your base, and then if you have a unit at an existing battlefield, you can play new units to go back that unit up at that battlefield, but you can't play units onto empty battlefield. though there are card effects that allow you to do so. That isn't the innate rules of the game. Now, you just saw me play a blue card with blue runes, so you might assume that that's something that you need to do. That is not the case. You can use yellow runes, blue runes, red runes. You can use whatever color runes you want to play whatever card you want, which is the numbered resource you're seeing in the top left-hand corner of the card. That is an entirely colorless concept. There's no such thing as blue energy or red energy. Now we can move on to Dead Bloom Predator, a significantly more complicated card. So let's ignore all of the text on Dead Bloom Predator just for a moment and focus in on the other things that have changed about the card. We still have the might in the top right. It has a new icon, but, you know, it's might. The cost in the top left, and you'll notice 2 new symbols underneath the cost. This is the power cost of the card. If we go back to our rune, in this case our mental rune, you'll see that the rune has 2 functionalities. It has exhaust, add 1, and that 1 is 1 energy. In addition to that, it has recycle me, add, and then like a crescent moon-shaped symbol. So what this is saying is you can either exhaust this card to gain 1 energy, or you can recycle it to gain 1 blue power. The easiest way to think about this is number equal energy, symbol equal power. So in this case, what Dead Bloom Predator is saying is that it costs 8 energy to play and 2 orange power. So in this example, I have 8 energy sitting here. So I would tap my 8 energy, and now that energy is floating. I haven't actually spent that energy yet. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to recycle these orange energy, which means putting them on the bottom of the deck that they come from. Or sorry, these 2 orange runes. And when I recycle these runes, I'm generating orange power, which means I now have enough to play this Dead Bloom Predator. So it's a pretty hefty cost to spend 8 regular energy and then 2 power, meaning that I'm going to have to recycle something. There are other ways to cheat power into play, but generally speaking, if you're spending power, it's because you're recycling a rune from your rune area into your rune deck. Just for reference, I'm going to quickly go over all of the information on this card because obviously they've moved around some stuff. For the rest of this video, we're going to use the classic card frames that they used in the original reveal because we don't have the new frames for most cards. But for reference, they have the card type and the card icon on the left of the name frame there. You can see like the little hooded figure and then unit, and then it has the new location for tags. So previously this would have been where Freljord was on Watchful Sentry. It now says Shadow Isles right there next to unit. Dead Bloom Predator is the name of the card, and it's kind of in the center of the card now as opposed to being at the bottom of the card. Its keyword is clearly dictated with the kind of solid color and then the indentation of the deflect text. And of course, the clarification is still in brackets, letting you know what that keyword means. In this case, it's saying the opponent must pay and then kind of like a rainbow rune symbol to choose Dead Bloom Predator as the target of a spell or an ability. The rainbow color there is just saying instead of having to spend a blue power to target Dead Bloom Predator, which would be very unfortunate if you weren't playing any blue in your deck, it's saying you can spend any color power to target the Dead Bloom Predator. And then Dead Bloom Predator's actual effect is you may play me at an occupied enemy battlefield. That's not saying like a battlefield that you didn't bring to the table. It's saying a battlefield that your opponent is currently at. So you would play the Dead Bloom Predator on there, and then you would immediately start a fight because as soon as your card occupies the same space in an enemy card, a fight begins. Combat doesn't really exist in this game the same way that you would think of combat in other card games, but we'll talk about that more as we continue throughout this. I'll have like a short section on how combat works. We can check out Legion Rearguard next because it gives an example of a concept to keep in mind. So he has Accelerate, which is a keyword that just means when you play this card, you may pay an additional cost. And in this case, it's saying 1 energy and 1 red power as an additional cost to have the card enter ready. That's because every card in Riftbound enters tapped, meaning that you can't do anything with it right away. It's got you can think of it as Summoning Sickness. It's a little bit different than Summoning Sickness because the card does actually enter tapped. But if a card specifically says that it enters ready, that means you don't enter it tapped. So Legion Rearguard, if you pay this additional cost, which is pretty hefty cost, right? You're paying 1 energy and 1 power. But if you do pay that cost, you can immediately move with Legion Rearguard. So I'm actually re-recording this whole section on spells because I recorded this using the old terminology and I want to make sure I'm using the current terminology. There are 3 different speeds at which spells can be played. Or perhaps a better way to put it is there are 3 windows you can play certain types of spells. So you've got the default speed, or I should say spells without keywords. These can only be played on your turn outside of a showdown. Spells that have the keyword action can be played during the same window as any spell, But in addition to that, they can also be played during showdowns, regardless of whether it's your turn or not. And then spells with reaction can be played during all of those windows, and in addition to that, can be played before resolving a spell or ability. So you can resolve it in response to a spell or ability, and resolve that effect before the card you're responding to gets to resolve. As an example, let's say our opponent uses Disintegrate on us, and we really want to prevent them from drawing a card with their Disintegrate. We could use Gust on our unit, which would return that unit to our hand. And if our opponent doesn't have some other follow-up response, what would happen is, because Disintegrate was added to the stack first, it'll be the last one to be removed from the stack. So Gust will resolve first, bouncing our unit to our hand, and then Disintegrate would not have a valid target, so it would fizzle and then go to the discard pile, which in this game, for reference, is called the trash. So we've gone over a unit, a spell, and a rune. Now let's talk about a gear. Seal of Unity is a 0 cost card. Well, kind of. It has a 0 energy cost, but it costs 1 yellow power, meaning you'll have to recycle a card to get this into play. The upside is that you can exhaust this card to gain 1 power. Most people interpret this card as like a soul rock or a mana rock in Magic the Gathering. Like, you can tap this to gain mana, but that's not really what this is doing. It's not giving you energy, it's just giving you power. So you couldn't use Seal of Unity to, for example, discount the cost of Watchful Sentry. So you couldn't tap Seal of Unity and then tap 1 rune to play Watchful Sentry. Let's say, for example, I wanted to play this Vanguard Captain, which is a 3 energy cost of 1 power card. I could tap 3 order runes and then recycle 1 order rune. So now I'm floating 3 energy and I'm floating 1 power. I'll spend that 1 power to play a Seal of Unity, which is the card we just talked about. And now I'm not floating any more power, right? I'm still floating my 3 energy, but I have no more power. Then I'm going to tap Seal of Unity, which generates a power, and I'm still floating that 3 energy. So I have 3 energy, 1 power floating, and then I can play the Vanguard Captain, which is a pretty good combo because Vanguard Captain has a keyword that says conditionally, when I play this card, as long as I've played another card this turn, I get this effect. And for that reason, Seal of Unity can be a really easy way to trigger a Legion effect, which typically is pretty difficult to do on curve. Seal of Unity is one of the only ways that you can do that for quote-unquote free. And now, the next time that I want to play a card that has a power requirement in addition to an energy cost, I'll have that Seal of Unity, and I won't have to recycle. Next, we can talk about Legends. Legends is going to let us talk a little bit about deck building, so we're going to jump around a little bit here between different parts of the game, so please follow me as closely as you can. You start with your Legends in play. Well, they're not really in play. They're not on a battlefield. They're kind of set aside. They have a passive effect or an activatable effect that'll help you throughout the course of the game. In the case of Victor, Herald of the Arcane, he has a 1-cost ability that says Exhaust him, meaning effectively it's once per turn, to play a 1 might recruit unit token. So this is just basically a 1 power recruit that you can put onto the board. As a result, Herald of Arcane likes to go wide, but there's a few things to consider when looking at a legend card that aren't necessarily its card effect. You might think, well, it's just a passive thing, you put it on the board, all that really matters is the card effect, but actually, there's a lot that goes into considering a legend. The first thing that goes into considering a legend is that passive ability, but they also have access to signature spells. So this is Siphon Power, which is a Victor signature spell, meaning that in order to put this card in my deck, my legend needs to be Victor. It's a very powerful ability. It's a 2-cost, 1 power ability, and you'll notice that the power here is both blue and yellow. That doesn't mean you need to spend both a blue and yellow rune, or it doesn't mean you need to recycle a blue and yellow rune to be able to get the power. It's just saying cycle either a blue or a yellow, generate a blue or yellow power. So it's still just 2 energy, 1 power. And then we get to choose a battlefield, and then all of the units at that battlefield, or all of your units at that battlefield, get +1 might, and then all of the enemy units there gets -1 might. It's a really, really powerful effect, definitely really strong for its cost. And that's pretty true of most of the signature spells. The signature spells are really, really powerful effects. Honestly, I think it's going to be the case that most of the time when you're choosing a legend, you're going to be looking at the signature spell more than the actual card effect itself, because this signature spell and then the other signature spells we've seen are so much more impactful, in my opinion, than the actual card effect of your legends in a lot of cases from the limited sample size we have. But we're not done there. There's another thing to consider when choosing a legend, and that is your champions. Champions are another card type. For the most part, you can consider champions units. Even for card effects that specifically say unit, they also mean champion. So earlier on, we talked about Disintegrate, which deals 3 damage to a unit at a battlefield. You would be forgiven if you thought, well, Legion Rearguard can be targeted by Disintegrate, but obviously Victor cannot be targeted by Disintegrate because Victor is a champion, not a unit. In fact, that's how I thought the game worked until Dave Guskin very politely joined our community Discord server and said, hey, listen up, that's not how that works. I actually don't remember whether it was Dave who said that or not, but someone at Riot clarified for us that champions are indeed units, despite the fact that it doesn't say anywhere on the card that they're units. You just kind of have to know that a champion is also a unit. The reason we care about a card being a champion instead of being a unit is because you have a legend and a champion slot that are external from your deck. So if Herald of the Arcane Victor, or just any Victor, is my champion, or sorry, my legend, I can select this Victor to be my champion, and now I can cast this card whenever I want and put it onto my battlefield. Or sorry, not on my battlefield, onto my base. It's kind of similar to a commander in Magic the Gathering, if you're familiar with that concept, with a couple different exceptions. This isn't like the command zone. If I play my champion Victor onto my base and then it gets killed by a removal spell, my Victor doesn't return to my partner slot or my champion slot. It goes to my trash just like any other card would. Now, you can choose any champion you like to go in that champion slot as long as it shares a name with the corresponding legend card. So in this case, I can play Leader Victor because my legend is Herald of Arcane Victor. Honestly, the new card frames are really helpful for this because it will just be a matter of matching the name next to the legend icon. So you can see the legend icon right next to that. It says Victor. That means I can play any Victor as my champion partner. I only just now realized how it might be confusing about why this even matters. Like, if you're not familiar with the card pool, it might be like, well, of course, you just use that as your partner. While we don't have examples of this for every legend, if we look at a legend like Jinx, you can see that she has 2 options for her partner. The Jinx legend is a Fury Chaos card, meaning it is red and purple. We've seen the red champion version of Jinx and the purple champion version of Jinx. So when you're building a Jinx deck, you have the opportunity to choose between which one of these you want to have as your partner. Just as a general rule of thumb, if you find yourself building a Jinx deck, I highly recommend the red Jinx over the purple Jinx, but that's a little bit outside of the scope of this video, so I won't bother going into that right now. If you're curious to know, all of the legends that we're going to get will have access to 2 champions to choose from. We just haven't seen them all yet. That's pretty much everything you need to know. I do have a couple more edge cases to talk about because I think they're kind of interesting and they might come up when you're looking through the card pool. So let's go over them real quick. First is Hidden Blade, which is our first example of a hidden card. Now, as far as I'm concerned, any card type, with probably the exception of like a legend, can be a hidden card. Hidden cards can either be played for their hidden cost or their printed cost. So in this case, Hidden Blade is a 2-cost, 1-power card, meaning if I wanted to cast this card, ignore everything that the card has to say in the hidden zone, just ignore that for a second, I'm going to black that out. I can spend 2 energy and 1 power to kill a unit at a battlefield, and then the controller of that unit gets to draw 2 cards. Or, Community Disc for 1 power. So I still have to spend a power, but I don't have to spend the 2 energy, and in the future, I can play that card that's currently face down as a reaction, and I can still get the same effect that I would have gotten if I spent 2 energy to do so. Now, you might be wondering why you would ever want the option to play this as a hidden card or as opposed to just playing it raw. The first reason is that you can only play a hidden card at a battlefield you control. So you can't play it on an empty battlefield, and you can't play it at a battlefield an opponent controls. So if an opponent has priority over a battlefield, you couldn't cast Hidden Blade at that battlefield unless you wanted to cast it raw. You couldn't cast the hidden version of it. Plus, you can only have 1 hidden card per battlefield, so you couldn't stack 2 Hidden Blades at 1 battlefield. And if you lose control of that battlefield, maybe the opponent uses a removal spell or something, you'll lose the Hidden Blade as well, or you'll lose whatever hidden card is there. Now, you do have a window to play it as a reaction, so for example, if I had... Now, this is a bit of a weird example because right now we don't have a red-yellow deck, but let's just say, for example, I had a Legion Rearguard down at Windswept Hillock. I played my face-down card here. My opponent knows what it is because... there's only one, well, there's 2 hidden cards right now. So they cast Disintegrate to kill my Legion Rearguard. Well, I have a window here to use this as a reaction to kill my own Legion Rearguard, and then because the controller gets to draw 2 cards, even though you would typically use Hidden Blade as a removal spell, if I'm using it on my own unit, now I get to draw 2 cards. Another downside to using a hidden card is if it's a targetable effect like this, you can only have it affect things at the battlefield it's hidden at. So let's say, for example, there's another battlefield over here, and I had another Legion Rearguard over here, and my opponent slaps a Dead Bloom Predator over there. My Legion Rearguard can't keep up with this. Theoretically, I might want to Hidden Blade the Dead Bloom Predator so I can maintain control of this battlefield, but I can't do that because a hidden card can only flip and resolve against effects at its own battlefield. So I couldn't Hidden Blade this. In fact, I can't even choose to use this as a reaction because the thing that I'm reacting to isn't even at this battlefield. Now, I said any card type can be a hidden card because I just showed you a hidden spell. Now I want to show you a hidden champion. We got Teemo. This was revealed to us not too long ago. Just like the Hidden Blade, we can play Teemo either for its energy cost, like its printed normal version, which is a 2-cost card in this case. We can play Teemo for 2, or we can play Teemo for just 1 power of any color. And then in the future, when we either play him as a reaction, or if we just played him raw from our hand, he would have +3 might just for that turn. So typically you're going to want to use him as a hidden card, but I'm sure there's going to be plenty of ways to manipulate this card in the future. In fact, even right now, there's ways to manipulate this card. If we played this card raw from our hand for 2 cost instead of spending the 1 power, let's say maybe there's some reason I don't want to spend the 1 power for whatever that reason might be. Maybe I just don't want to recycle and I'm going to be too far behind on curve. Well, I can use Yasuo's leader ability to move Teemo and immediately attack with him, even though I wouldn't normally be able to do that. Yasuo's ability says I can spend 2 and exhaust him to move a unit from the base to a battlefield, or to or from, it doesn't matter. And the end result of that in this case would be that I'd be attacking with Teemo with 4 might, which is really, really efficient for 2 energy. Technically, you're kind of doing it for 4 energy because you're using the Yasuo ability, but it might be worth it for you to do that instead of using the hidden cost in some cases, because of course, the hidden cost makes you recycle a rune and you might need that energy next turn. I'm sure there's going to be lots of ways to manipulate hidden cards, especially because this is a Teemo champion card, and we know that there's a Teemo legend coming in the future. My guess is that Teemo's going to let you manipulate hidden cards in some way. Maybe he'll say, like, you can flip a hidden card face down again. So, like, maybe you flip Teemo up to fight in a battle, and then when that battle is done, on your next turn, you flip him back face down so that he'll be 4 power again for the next fight. That'd be kind of fun. Alright, that's everything that you need to know about this game. That took a long time. Hopefully that helped you and your understanding of this beautiful game. There's a lot to follow there, so don't worry if you didn't catch everything. Be sure to jump into the community Discord to join us for some games. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.